Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
Just give everybody a minute to settle in. Great. Welcome, everybody. I'm Talia Kahn-Kravis, she, her pronouns, and I am the Assistant Director of Homeownership Programs at OHCS. And I am joined by this really well-packed, solid panel today that you'll get to hear from everybody. Before they introduce themselves, I'm just going to set the stage for what we'll be doing over the next hour and a half that we have you as our captive audience. We're really excited to be talking about homeownership development and how we scale homeownership development across the state in all corners. And so our goal here is to hear more about people's experiences. We have really experienced developers operating in different parts of the state, and we'll hear area-specific challenges and opportunities. We also are going to be talking about OHCS homeownership development tools. And so we'll actually start off the panel with a little presentation. We've got some slides for you about the tools that OHCS offers related to homeownership development. And then we'll step out of that context and get into more interactive conversation. As we go, if you have thoughts, we had some questions up in the back of the room, but they've fallen now. I'll put them back up. But if you have big thoughts about what's happening, or small thoughts, any kind of thoughts about what's happening in related to homeownership development, needs, opportunities, skills, resources needed in your community, we'd love to, if you put some thoughts down on sticky notes, and as you leave, you can put them up. We'll preface that activity as it gets a little closer, but feel free to start doing that now. Before we get started, I wanted to see a little bit more about who's in the room. So raise your hand if your organization, entity has accessed OHCS funding before. Okay, great. Seems like the majority. Okay, raise your hand if your entity or organization has built affordable homes for purchase. Okay, little less. Raise your hand if you have any affordable homeownership projects in the pipeline that haven't yet been built. Okay, a little more. And raise your hand if you're just homeownership development curious, but don't have any projects in the pipeline. All right. Cool. Hopefully we convert some of you all. Great. Well, I'm going to pass it over to the panelists who are going to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst for OHCS. And my role is I basically manage and run the homeownership development funding opportunities.
Great. Hello. My name is Katie Ulrich, and I'm the Associate Director at Proud Ground, and we are a community land trust serving now 6 counties.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Ryman. I'm the CEO of Dev Northwest, and we are an affordable housing developer, including homeownership, serving 6 counties from Lane to Clackamas and over to the coast.
Hi, my name's Shannon Vilhauer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity of Oregon. We support the 23 local Habitat for Humanity affiliates who build and repair homes across the state.
My name's Jeff Petrillo. Use he, his pronouns representing the rest of the gender compared to the panel. But I work with Wallowa Resources and Working Homes in Wallowa County, who is working basically a startup operation for doing home ownership and other affordable housing work over the last 2 years.
All right. Talia gave a great welcome, so thanks, Talia, and thanks to our panelists for joining us today. Oh, my buttons are supposed to work here. There we go. We do have a brief agenda, so I'll start off the presentation by introducing some of the resources that we have available at OHCS. I'll also kick off that little audience activity that Talia mentioned earlier. And then we'll move over into the homeownership development panel. We'll have some questions for them to answer, to talk about their experiences, and then we'll open it up for questions and feedback and thoughts from the rest of you. All right. So what are some tools available from OHCS? We've kind of put together this little toolbox to present to you today. Big heads up in advance, we use a lot of acronyms at OHCS, OHCS being one of those. So I'm going to try to at least have everything on the slide or say what the abbreviations stand for out loud. So today I'm going to talk about LIFT, OEHTC or OTEC, HDIP, LAP, and a couple of other tools. Most of my time today is going to be spent on LIFT because this is our more predominant source of funding, and it is also going to be available in next year's NOFA. LIFT stands for Local Innovation and Fast Track, and this is a program that's funded with Article 11Q capital bonds. If you're not familiar with what those are, capital bonds are meant to fund things that the state owns or operates. Typically that means like bridges or the Capitol building, but it can also represent homeownership or other housing developments. LIFT supports both rental and homeownership developments. They are similar but very separate, so I'm only going to talk about homeownership today. It's the most consistent and available funding for homeownership development. I think this program started in 2018, and we've received funding for it every year since then. So fingers crossed that continues into the foreseeable future. And it's not something that we can say about many of our other resources. The only challenge is that LIFT does come with some specific requirements that have been challenging to navigate for a lot of developers. But I'm excited to say that over time, as more developers have moved through the process, they've become more familiar and more able to navigate it. And we've also tried to make the program more accessible. So we've seen a big uptick in the use of LIFT. So who's eligible for LIFT? This is written into statute under the eligible covenant holder definition of ORS 456-270. Generally, this includes government agencies, public agencies, nonprofit organizations, co-ops, and federally recognized Indian tribes. You'll notice that this does not include for-profit organizations, and unfortunately, we can't support for-profit organizations with LIFT. The types of developments that LIFT can support is generally net new housing. So that includes new construction of affordable homeownership housing units, conversion of non-housing units into new affordable homeownership units, and new manufactured home parks, as long as those homes are included and are permanently affixed to the foundation. We do have some specific requirements for LIFT. So we do require a shared equity model, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We require homes to be affordable to less than 80% AMI. The funds can only be spent on capitalized construction costs. So what that means is like anything that adds value to the property, like the actual construction, your site work. It doesn't include a lot of soft costs and things like that. And then the other limitation is that the project must not have begun vertical construction. So site work can be started, but foundations and up can't have started yet. Sorry. So shared equity models. If you're not familiar with what a shared equity model is, kind of a really general explanation is like shared ownership of a property. So typically we will see the homeowner owning the unit or the structure or the home, and then a nonprofit organization or other kind of organization owning the land underneath the property. So these are 5 more common examples of shared equity models, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on each of them. But typically we'll see a community land trust. That's our #1 style of project that comes through. That follows the typical model of the homeowner owns the structure, and then the community land trust owns the land. And then they enter into kind of an agreement on how the increased value of the property is split between the 2 organizations. So the homeowner would walk away with a limited amount of the equity from that growth. And then the community land trust, once they sell the property, could recycle the additional funds to maintain the affordability of that home for generations and new home buyers and for a long extended time. So this is a limitation of the program because it's the only type of model that we can support. But I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that our ability to support shared equity models is a limitation, because it is really an opportunity to support this permanent affordability model in Oregon. And I think because of LIFT and this requirement, we've seen kind of an explosion of CLTs across Oregon, which has been a great opportunity for the state. I talked a little bit about some challenges at a really high level. If you are thinking that if there are already challenges at this high level, if you dive deeper in, there's going to be more, you're probably right. So this year we convened a LIFT Workgroup, the goal of which is to kind of identify some of these deeper challenges and address them and figure out a path forward to make this program more accessible. A couple of our panelists were on this work group, so I'm hopeful they'll be able to talk about it a little bit during the panel session. This slide includes some of the goals that the work group had. So the first one, ensure that LIFT supports density in areas of high opportunity and development in rural areas. This is something that I'll talk about more on the next slide, but that has absolutely been a limitation of this program to date. The second, ensure that LIFT homeownership projects don't create barriers for construction lenders. We did have a small issue working with some construction lenders, but we've resolved that issue so far. We think we've resolved this issue. Increase access to mortgage products for LIFT home buyers. So one of the limitations of LIFT is because of the restrictions on the program, home buyers were only able to use Oregon bond program or portfolio loans. We've made some modifications that we think will open up the program to FHA loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans. We just need approval from Fannie Mae to move forward, but that's an exciting, very large improvement to the program. The next goal is ensure that foreclosure of one home doesn't jeopardize the entire LIFT project. This was an issue with some of our legal language that we have updated and resolved. And then the last item is standardized LIFT documents, which is something that we're still in the process of working on with our work group. So going back to that first item, difficulty serving rural and dense developments, the main limitation of that was the maximum amount that we could award a project. So the previous interpretation of the laws was that LIFT could only award up to the appraised value of the land plus site work, or $200,000, whichever was lower. So for a lot of urban developments, that was fine, that worked out okay. But for rural developments where land values are lower, LIFT wasn't enough to fill the gap since the construction costs were still the same or sometimes even higher. This was also a challenge with dense developments because that land value doesn't change no matter how many units you stack on top of it. So as your construction costs increase, the LIFT award didn't increase with that. So we are excited to announce that next year we're going to update that, thanks to a lot of hard work from the working group and the Department of Justice. But we're going to be moving to this per unit maximum subsidy. So the table here on the slide shows exactly the maximum award that you could receive for each unit based on its bedroom size or based on its bedroom count. And then based on feedback from the community, a little bit of a bonus for rural developments, as we found that construction costs may still be a little higher and there are fewer opportunities available. The way that this will work is applicants will submit a pro forma with their application detailing all of their construction costs and their sales prices. They'll have to have at least one other funding source, and that's because LIFT won't be able to cover every single expense. And then we will fill the gap to make that project pencil up to a 10% net profit and up to that per unit maximum. So it's possible some developments will get that whole maximum award, and it's possible some might be a little bit less, just depending on those construction costs and sales prices. The legal documents, the way that we kind of manage how this program works is that we'll enter into an operating agreement that dictates what all of the rules and expectations are. Then we'll place a lien on the whole project, so the land and the future improvements during the construction phase. And then as the homes are sold, we'll release the lien on the improvements. And then we'll keep that lien on the land for the life of the loan. So that's where the shared equity model comes in. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That's where the shared equity model comes in and why we require that, so that the organization that we enter into these agreements with has that maintained ownership on the land. If you're interested in this program, we are launching our next NOFA in January, so super soon. We're very excited. We'll be accepting applications until May 2025, and awards will be given on a first come, first served basis to applications that meet a minimum criteria. Those minimum criteria are a preliminary review, which is like a checklist of all of the mandatory things, and then a threshold review. So the project will be scored against this minimum criteria and set up against the other projects. And we are still engaged in outreach and community engagement on the development of this next NOFA. I have a QR code here with the little dinosaur. That links to our technical advisory that has links to register for all of these sessions. I have the link at the bottom of the slide there. It's a really sketchy link, but it is ours, so don't worry about that. The first session, we're going to go into more detail about what the NOFA is, the scoring criteria. We'll release our updated LIFT manual for homeownership. So we'll talk through that for a while. And then the next session in green there is going to be office hours. So after you have time to absorb everything and read the updated manual, we'll have this session available where we'll just be there to listen to your feedback. And then we have our homeownership development partner call, which is, we have this every quarter, but this time will be our final call for feedback. If you've been in other meetings with me where I've kind of pushed this whole meeting agenda for the engagement, you'll notice that these dates have been pushed back. So if you've registered already, your calendar will be updated soon, and we are going to put out an updated technical advisory. Oh, you can see my team's messages. All right. Okay, so that's everything for LIFT, and I'll move on to OHCS for homeownership. OHCS stands for the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit. If you are not familiar with that, it is a state tax credit that's offered to lenders who are able to offer affordable permanent loans with reduced financing costs for affordable housing developments. This isn't something that's typical in homeownership development because homeownership developments don't use permanent loans. When you sell the home, you're able to pay back your construction loan. You don't need that 30-year long pro forma. But there are a couple of situations where this could possibly work. So the legislature requested that we figure out how to use this for limited equity co-ops. we are launching that program along with the 2025 NOFA. So if you're interested in limited equity co-ops, you can come to our next meeting where we'll talk in more detail about that. OHTC can also be used for manufactured homes. I'm not going to go into that much detail on it. This program is run by the rental division, so I don't really know how it works. But you're welcome to reach out to them if you're interested in developing manufactured home parks. Jumping into our HDIP program. HDIP stands for Homeownership Development Incubator Program. This is another program that we run in our Homeownership Development Department. It is a program that's funded with general funds, so it gives us a whole lot of flexibility to kind of fill in gaps and run programs the way that we'd like to run them. Unfortunately, general funds are kind of like gold at the state, so there's not enough of it to go around, and sometimes we don't always get it. So we do have a request for $50 million included in our requests to the legislature and to the governor for next biennium's request. So fingers crossed, we'll see that. If we do get that through the legislature, those funds will probably be available to the public in 2026. But currently, we don't actually have any funds available for this program. The way that HDIP is run, I do want to go into detail just because it's a resource we might have in the future. But the way that this program is run is it's kind of broken down into different sub-programs that meet different needs and fill different gaps. So in the past, we had this LIFT supplemental program that was available in 2023 and 2024. And its goal was to kind of fill that gap that I talked about for rural and dense developments and other developments where the value of their land couldn't kind of get their project over the hump. It was a really great resource. It helped us fund a lot of projects that we wouldn't have been able to fund without having this resource. And hopefully we won't actually have need of this program anymore with the new adjustments to LIFT. We've got the pre-development and capacity building grant program. This is a small grant to developers who are looking to either branch out and find a new development or expand their capacity. On the pre-development side, we can cover costs that LIFT typically can't, or costs that need to be incurred before you can ever even apply for LIFT. So things like feasibility studies, certain site costs, and early site work. The capacity building grant really funds anything that you can dream of to improve your capacity. But what we were able to fund in 2023 kind of followed along three really main trends, which is salaries for new employees to kind of grow that internal capacity, research projects to either determine the direction that the organization would like to go or the direction that a development would go, or outreach and community engagement projects. The third sub-program is development subsidies, and the goal of this program is to fund projects that LIFT can't fund. So this would include projects that are by for-profit organizations. It would include projects up to 120% AMI instead of 80%, and it would include projects not using a shared equity model. And then the last sub-program that we have is the tribal subsidies program. While federally recognized tribes are eligible for LIFT, it often doesn't work and it can't be used on tribal lands. So we did work with various tribes back in 2023 when we were working on this program. And the way that we kind of resolved to meet the need is that this kind of has the flexibility to fund their developments, but it also can cover things like down payment assistance and home repairs that were needed for their tribal members. My understanding is that there's work going on the tribal housing block grant. If that passes and if we receive funding, it is possible that this program, if it continues, could be enacted through that block grant program, but that would require some more research to move forward. Yeah, so that's it for HDIP. I did want to clarify, I walked through what the sub-programs are. We do an engagement process for every single notice of funding availability. So if we do receive additional funds for HDIP in 2026, in 2025, next year, we'll do another engagement process, and all of those programs could totally change. But that's just the way it's working right now. So the next program is the Land Acquisition Program. This is run by the Affordable Rental Division. So I don't have a whole lot to say on this program, but it is available to purchase land. It's designed to be quicker to give funding to you than our other programs are, so that you can purchase the land in a more competitive market. It follows similar restrictions to LIFT, so applicants must be an eligible covenant holder, projects must serve 80% AMI, and they must be shared equity models. The applications need to be submitted through the ORCA, which is the rental division's application process. And the way that this program works is essentially you'll get those funds upfront to purchase the land. And then when you close on your financing, like a construction loan or LIFT or any of our programs, that would be when you pay back that loan, and it would revolve in to pay for the next organization's land. Just a quick slide on the funding that's available. So this year, homeownership received 40% of the LAP funds. The way that the rental division kind of splits it out is geographically. So a portion of the funds goes to metro counties, which are listed in gray, and a portion goes to the rest of the state. And there's also a small portion for culturally specific organizations. Those recycled funds that are repaid at closing are not specified on those geographic levels. And then just really quickly on some other tools that are available. These are not programs that I run, so I don't have a lot of information on them. But we do have this racial disparities in homeownership program. So as anyone who works in homeownership knows, there is a very strong disparity between racial and ethnic groups, with BIPOC organizations having much lower homeownership rates. So this program offers support, language access support, and funding for culturally responsive programs and community-specific outreach activities in an attempt to kind of bring equity back to homeownership in Oregon. This program is available annually through OHCS. It's already kind of been issued this year, so look forward to it in the future. The Moderate Income Housing Revolving Loan Program was something that was adopted at the legislature this year, SB 1537. This is still in development. It's something that our policy teams are working on at OHCS. But the way that it is supposed to work is essentially your local jurisdictions will create a program to fund the types of housing that they are interested in funding. When they select an eligible project, the state will give them a loan for that amount. Your jurisdiction will give you the funding to build the property. And then the increase in the taxes from, the empty land, the increase in the tax base, those taxes will, instead of being paid as taxes, will go back to repay that loan, and then be recycled into the program to support new projects that way. And that's my summary of it. I hope that's an accurate summary. It's not something I'm working on. And then here's some other funding sources. The down payment assistance is from OHCS, but some of these other programs are not from our department. They're offered from other, or they're not even from OHCS. They're offered from other agencies at the state. So I won't go into detail. We are going to ask you a little bit later in the program, or in this presentation, what other resources you know of, so that we can expand this list. It doesn't have to be state resources. So as the presentation continues, maybe keep that in the back of your mind. And that is it for my presentation. So I just wanted to quickly introduce the audience activity for the day. It's mostly just us collecting your feedback and thoughts so that we can better tailor our programs and make sure that we're serving all of Oregon and meeting everyone's needs. So this QR code, it goes to an easy retro board. This is basically like a virtual whiteboard where anyone can post sticky notes in relationship to questions. So we'll ask you a couple of questions throughout the presentation and the panel time, and you can post your responses to those questions on that interactive easy retro board. If you're like my husband and you never scan strange QR codes from anywhere, anytime, for any reason, we do have sticky notes on your table. So if you want to write down your responses, we've got the sticky notes and we've got sticky paper in the back. If you're like me, and if you're answering questions, you're not going to hear anything anyone else has to say. We will pose all of the questions at the end of the session. So if you want to just wait so you can listen to our panelists talk, you can have some time at the end to write all of your answers really quick before you go on to the next session. So the first question is relating to my presentation. So considering everything I shared, what tools are we lacking for homeownership development or for your organization? And I'll go ahead and hand it back.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah.
So Jessica just described a lot of different tools, but we all know development projects take more than tools from one agency. It takes a lot to put the pieces together to make development happen. And we're really excited to have this experienced crew that has been doing development, and not just in the weeds of development on individual projects, but have played a role in scaling homeownership development throughout the state. So I just wanted to start off by having them tell a little bit of their homeownership development story. So how did your organization, how and when did you start doing homeownership development? You don't have to go through that whole elongated story, but how has your role in that arena evolved over time? And Katie, if you don't mind, we'll go this way. I saw that.
That's fine. Yeah, so, I think Proud Ground has an interesting history. We were started in 1999 in the city of Portland, really to be a community land trust. And very specifically, we were instructed to work in partnership with other nonprofit and for-profit developers. So our history was not to do actual homeownership development. It was really to partner at that time with a lot of CDCs, to be at the end, basically the entity that will create kind of what Jessica was saying, the shared equity homeownership model, where our community land trust owns the land and stewards the ongoing affordability of those homes, essentially in perpetuity. So we did that for a really long time, and then we found that there were some of the CDCs were going away, not doing that new development. And so we did end up getting our developer's license and actually did a 12-unit townhouse development in Southeast Portland that was very successful. And at the end of that, I mean, I'm just gonna be transparent about all this. At the end of that, we were like, wow, that was a lot of work. And we had to bring in a lot of expertise in order to do that. So we kind of did go back more to really only stepping into the developer role if absolutely needed. And that is kind of where we are standing now, although we are finding more and more opportunities to step into that role. But really the evolution of our organization was to be the end community land trust, keeping these homes permanently affordable and not as focused on the development.
So Dev Northwest has been in homeownership development for a long time, but not in community land trust or shared equity development. So back in the 80s and 90s, we did a lot of fee simple ownership for low-income first-time buyers because and this was before my time, we could get some donated land and build modestly and meet affordability thresholds. And then those days ended. And kind of from 2000 to 2009, we were able to still do some fee simple ownership development through acquisition rehab, because we could acquire some older modest starter homes, do enough rehab, sell them, still meet some affordability benchmarks, and then that also went away. And so really from like 2009 to 2018, we didn't do homeownership development. We had shifted to rental. We were still doing a lot of homeownership education and counseling, but we just couldn't make the development pencil, which is why Dev Northwest joined with a lot of our peers in the state to push for the LIFT homeownership funding, because we knew that the calculation had changed and we just weren't going to be able to get back to that without some pretty significant public investment. So when we got the LIFT money and it came with the shared appreciation model, we embraced that. We did have a few community land trust units historically, but like 8. And now with the LIFT funding, we've been able to go from, back in the fee simple days or the early CLT days, we were maybe developing 4, 6, 8 units a year. And now we have subdivisions of 42, 46 units going on. So we've been able to scale dramatically from what we were able to do historically.
So Habitat for Humanity, when I started in Salem as a VISTA volunteer in 1999, for an organization that had 1 FTE, 1 VISTA, and a full-time volunteer. We were in a space that had been a closet. Plants would die because there was no natural light, right? What we did is we worked really hard to raise all the funds to build 1 home with volunteers. And then we would self-lend that mortgage at 0% interest to the home buyer, whom we would qualify in alternative ways. Like, do you pay all your bills on time? Do you have a good landlord reference? We weren't too worried about credit, right? It was just, do you pay your bills on time? And it was incredibly generous and wonderful and slow. So slow, right? Because 0% interest mortgages are maybe not the best business model to bring something to scale, right? So there was that. So over time, we were talking to our friends across the country and trying to learn and understand how to do more things. And to make matters like a little bit worse on top of that, we were told we weren't allowed to use government funds for anything but land acquisition. We had like a prohibition, and we were just like, are you sure? Are you sure? Right. So things have changed since that time, because what would happen, and I did some of these, we would invite people to apply for homes. We'd have these meetings at different times of day to meet people where they were at different days of the week. And we'd have something like 60 qualified applicants for 1 house. Right. Like, that doesn't feel that great. Right. So how do we serve more people? How do we serve more people? And we started figuring out how to try some different things. So for example, when I went to work for Habitat Portland Region in 2007, Habitat Portland Region was building 10 to 15 homes a year, right? Sort of using government funds a little. If we could get some TIF district funds, maybe. If we could get some down payment assistance from the state, maybe. What could we do? And 10 to 15 homes was more than 1, but not a ton, right? And then in time, we tried permanent affordability with LIFT. That was a huge infusion of government funds compared to anything we'd seen in the past. And we went up to 25 homes a year in Portland. That was pretty exciting, pretty exciting. And now Habitat Portland Region, I don't work there anymore. They're smarter than I am, right? They're building and selling over 70 homes a year right now, right, using some of these programs. And so we've seen that as a scalable innovation, is a term I like to use. That Sisters Oregon started using LIFT, and they went from building 3 to 9 homes a year. And I think they're going to build like 28 in the next 3 years, which is pretty cool. We saw this with West Tuality Habitat in Forest Grove. So we're trying to really figure out, and sometimes there's a little compromise. That 0% interest mortgage was a good deal. It was a good deal. That's a great way to maximize your equity wealth, right? But man, it's nice to serve 70 families in a community where you're serving 10 to 15. Right. So that's an evolution we've seen over time.
I work with the organization called Working Homes, which is a subsidiary of Wallowa Resources, which itself is about a 25-year-old economic development organization helping to preserve and enhance rural life and economies, and serves Wallowa County. And in 2000, the cost of housing in Wallowa County was quite reasonable, and you could afford it. And most people, the median income was more in line with the median price of housing. Today, that is way out of balance, as it is throughout most of the country, if not almost all of the state. The average home price is about, the median price is 450,000. And the income to buy that would probably be about 150,000, and only about probably 13% of the population is capable of doing that. And so the county and Wallowa Resources realized they needed more housing because the economy was dependent upon it. It's a rural economy. It's only 7,000, 8,000 people. And so small businesses, it's also a recreation county. So it's a destination for tourism, a lot of service employees, and even just bringing in teachers is an obstacle because there's not enough housing that's affordable, let alone just even sometimes housing itself at any price. There's just been a dearth of it. To the extent that the public school system actually set up classrooms to be used as temporary housing for newly hired teachers as a temporary sort of bridge until they could find more permanent housing. And it gives you an idea of how, what the crisis that we're in. But you know, the crisis is happening all over the country. And so Working Homes was founded to address that with no staff and no money in the bank. They set out to do what they hope would be affordable housing. For them, that meant workforce housing, which would be anything between 60% and 120%. Really with probably the sweet spot being 80 to 100% AMI. And there were, so how do you start off? There was opportunities like, well, buy this land or do this. And, but they didn't, but the folks at Working Homes, the advisory board, which I'm a member of, didn't know really much about affordable housing as it exists as an industry. They didn't know what OHCS is. They didn't know what an AMI is, let alone LIFT, God forbid. And so the incubator program, which Jessica referred to, it was something we decided to apply for to help get us off of, get to first base essentially. And we applied and were awarded 150,000, which enabled us to hire a staff person and begin some due diligence work on some land that we were wanting to purchase, as well as sort of it helped us raise other funds from some of the community foundations in the state. And that was 2.5 years ago. And this summer, we just completed our first home in the city of Wallowa, and it is going on the market this week with a price tag of, I think, $248 is what we settled on, to serve up to 100% AMI. That was done without LIFT funds. That was done with county, local funds, and foundation funds. And we, along with that, we purchased 3 lots adjacent to that home that that are already under construction to build similar homes. And so we've gone from 0 to, 60 miles an hour. And I feel like we feel like sort of the poster child for the incubator program, but it worked to help us get there. And hiring staff was really probably the most critical piece. And so we're looking, as we've gone down this road, more and more opportunities have come up, like people offering, well, I have some land, or, hey, there's something over this way or that way. The problem is, one is capacity, staff capacity. We just don't have enough. And 2 is readily accessible capital that we could use to acquire these properties. Unfortunately, because the state's land acquisition program, which I think is a great program, is capped out at 80%, and we really are trying to commit ourselves to 60 to 100 and 80 to 100 AMI. And the LIFT program is also capped out at 80. And ideally, we would like the legislature to consider moving it up to at least 100, particularly as we are struggling with workforce housing and middle housing throughout the state. And I know there's arguments pro and con on that the need is greater for lower AMIs, but we are now at a point, generational point, a historical point where the folks between 60 and 130, 50 even are really struggling to get into the housing market, the home ownership market. So we've been successful. Our next step is to try to expand, but we need capital and we need capacity. So.
Thanks. And that's really exciting about that first home. I didn't know that. That's awesome. Great. I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then we'll just open it up to everybody here to ask everybody questions. We heard your answer was actually a great segue, but you're all operating in different parts of the state, maybe some of you operating statewide. What are some of the opportunities that you're seeing in your area or with your affiliates? And what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing? So big loaded question, but would love to hear thoughts. And who wants to go first? I won't make you go first again, Katie. Okay, first.
Okay, so Dev Northwest works in Lane, Lynn, Benton, Lincoln, Marion, a little bit of Polk and Clackamas. So we serve a lot of suburban areas and also a lot of rural areas. The single biggest challenge to date has been that land value cap. Because with the exception of like Corvallis and parts of Clackamas County, we could not get anywhere near the 200,000 per unit subsidy. And we needed it. We needed it especially like post 2021. We mentioned that LIFT got funding for the first time in 2018, which means I think it went out for NOFA in 2019, which means all the first projects were starting to be constructed in 2020 and 2021 when the inflation skyrocketed. And that was unfortunate timing. So that is like we've been working with OHCS really intensively to try to change that because that has been the single biggest hurdle if you are not in a high income, high land value place. What that's meant is that we've had to layer a whole lot of different funding sources. So we've used LIFT. We've been able to use some home and CDBG from different jurisdictions. We've been able to use some CET money from certain jurisdictions. We've been able to use some of the congressional earmark funding that came back recently. It's a real hodgepodge, which is complicated and time intensive and comes back to the need for staffing. So that's been a real challenge. One of the other challenges we faced, interestingly, as we started to do subdivisions, because this is a different can of worms, the LIFT funding requires that your homes be, have certificates of occupancy and be sold within 3 years. And if you are doing a whole subdivision process that is its own set of challenges with a local jurisdiction and a whole timeline of its own before you can begin any vertical, and then if you have to like phase your vertical because your construction lenders don't want to lend on 40 units at a time, there's a real clock challenge involved. And so we've done projects two ways. We did one as a 42 unit subdivision all at once and had to apply to OHCS for extensions. And we ended up doing another 46 unit in 3 phases with 3 distinct subdivision processes, which is also a pain in the butt. So not a great solution either way, but definitely a challenge to know about if you're getting into the size of development that is subdivisions. Another challenge we faced was trying to find contractors who would work on that small scale subdivision level. We have a lot of great contractors who build fancy houses one at a time. And we have a lot of great commercial contractors who build multifamily rental housing. And we put out, I think, 3 RFPs before we got a single respondent from a contractor who wanted to build a 12-unit subdivision. And so long story short, we started our own GC firm last year as an affiliate because we were having so much trouble finding GCs who wanted that kind of project and could meet our timelines and our budgets and all of that. So those are some of the kind of big challenges that we faced early on.
Thanks, Emily. Well, I'm looking at so many knowledgeable people out here in the audience. I'm wishing you were up here to tell your stories. Here are some things that I think I see. That Habitat for Humanity network that I mentioned, Habitat Portland region is by far our largest and best staffed affiliate in the state. 19 of them are based in rural communities and have very modest staffing levels and have volunteer boards who are the decision makers. So sometimes we have a progressive executive director who wants to do the things that are proven now that we know work, that using the Oregon Bond Program or partnering with a progressive bank to get a below market rate mortgage for home buyers using USDA 502. Sometimes even that transition when you've been self-lending for decades is very scary, right? So there's a little bit of a learning curve and a cultural shift. We also experienced the pandemic in super real ways when you build with volunteers, right? When volunteers get told to stay at home, how do you keep getting those homes built? And as we scale up our capacity, taking advantage of some government funds, there's also that's a cultural shift too, right? Who volunteers how in your organization if you're going to use subs more to get more sophisticated styles of homes built? So those have been transitions that are important. And I think, if I may for a moment, that homeownership development incubator program, wow, that did huge things for our network because that pre-work to get your site ready to go for a lift so you can actually get the homes built in 3 years. There's no other tool like that for homeownership developers in our state. Private foundations, Meyer used to do some of that years ago, not so much these days, right? So that was just really a boon. And I see those LIFT applications. I'm looking at Sarah Wrights with affiliates, coming online, coming to fruition. But we haven't had that resource for a minute. And I'm fearful we're going to lose ground. Also, that staffing. Oh, it is competitive to find a construction person in rural Oregon and then to keep them and not have them get hired away from you is a thing. So having just a little bit of oomph that lets you hire and retain that qualified person in rural Oregon to really keep your project going and on track. I just can't say enough good things. And because LIFT is complicated, being able to use HDIP as a standalone development resource for some habitat affiliates. I'm thinking of our friends in McMinnville and Lapine, who, are still on this learning curve from being a very volunteer-run organization to a more professional home builder, right? Because it can take some time and some steps over time, and maybe organizations who just want to try this out or get into it and have different strengths and competencies to have a more flexible, lower bar of entry for subsidy for affordable home ownership was incredibly important.
Did we want to go that way? No. I'm trying to think of all the things. So I was trying to think of the opportunities because I think you also asked for opportunities, right? And we kind of leaned more towards challenge, but Proud Ground definitely, we did benefit from the capacity building funding through the state, and we're able to hire a real estate development manager, which has really helped our staff be able to work on other opportunities throughout our service area, which is continuing to grow. So that has been very helpful. And I think, just like what Emily was saying, LIFT is great, and we usually have to find other funding to even supplement that. So we have had the opportunity to layer funding, which is amazing. I think challenge-wise, I do, everybody, feel like I'm talking to people that know this as well, but it's still oversubscribed. So like all these funding sources, there are more opportunities, and we get contacted frequently by potential partners, and we have to turn them away because of both just the funding is not there. We know that we're already got our stuff built out, and we're not going to be able to apply for another round of funding until a future date. And then also the challenge really organizationally with balancing that capacity growth within the organization with those potential opportunities that are coming. So I think that's where we see the most challenge is we have other developers that want to work with us. We have need in the community. It's just really that access to the funding. Let's going to see what other pieces. And I would just say, so with Proud Ground working, our service area is primarily in the Portland metro region, as well as we have homes in Lincoln County. And then our latest development is down in Medford. with over 80 homes that will be developed, LIFT funded. And it really is for our organization, I'm sure others that might do more statewide work, it's really also finding local partners that have the capacity to really be on the ground there, working with home buyers, really educating them about, shared equity and community land trust homeownership is unique. So making sure that that education is upfront and transparent with those home buyers has been a challenge as well that we face.
Doing the work of bringing affordable housing in and using government resources, one of the criteria or prerequisites is community support. And that can be a challenge in a rural area to say, we're going to do affordable housing and we're going to bring in government money. And particularly in eastern parts of Eastern Oregon, and I've seen it in Wallowa County, we'll identify and be awarded or, about a public resource, and there might be some public meeting about it. And sure enough, within a day or two, social media is full of what do we need government money for, or things along that line. This is a bootstrapping type of community, and they're suspicious of government help, and that's one of the challenges you face in rural areas throughout this country, I believe. But I've seen it very intimately in Wallowa County, and it's frustrating because it requires education. People have really have misunderstandings about how it works. I mean, quite frankly, we operate in a very esoteric industry, and so it's hard to explain to anybody, even your spouse, what you do. That's one unique challenge. The other challenges that we face as a startup organization, as a rural Eastern organization, is that we're very rural. That's where the challenge we face is that are very endemic to Wallowa County. There's one road in and one road out. Okay, there's 7,000 to 8,000 people. There's no Home Depot within the county, and not even in the next county. There's no Costco. And so our cost of building is higher because we just don't have competing resources or access to as many resources. And that's on top of the fact that our average home price is a lot higher because we're technically, or in reality, a recreational county. 20 to 25% of the housing stock is seasonal vacation property, very similar to what happens along the coastline in Oregon. And what does that do? That creates a problem. So we have the the median price is $450. Well, the adjacent counties, it's 100,000 less. Well, why is that? Because retirees and others come in, or people, they build expensive vacation homes, raising the overall housing price in the area and the land, but their income is counted in whatever county they're living in, whether Boise or Portland or Salem. And so our median income there's a bigger gap between our median income and our median price, which is one reason why we want to be able to serve 80 to 100, because our 80 to 100 is like 40 to 6, is like 50 to 70 in other parts of the state. So, and the recreational aspect is a challenge because it's actually a growth area. I'll just offhand just say that, I remember years ago, Governor Kitzhaber, when I first moved to the state, was governor, and they asked him, if you only had one destination you could tell a visitor to go to in Oregon, what would it be? And he said the Wallowas. And I didn't know what in the world he was talking about, and many people don't, but the reason is because it's a beautiful location. And so we are dealing with this influx of people, but we don't have, we have these gaps and, challenges because of our smallness and the lack of access to capital and markets. So.
Great. So last question from me, multi-part again, but you each have played a role in providing technical assistance to scale the field, whether it's with an individual organization or multiple. So I'd love for you to just tell everybody a little bit about what type of technical assistance you've provided. What did it look like? How did it go? What did you learn? And maybe what are some takeaways from that about what else is needed to scale the field?
Thanks, Talia. Well, as mentioned, we support 23 local Habitat for Humanity affiliates across the state. And our team at Habitat Oregon, we actually worked with a consultant to talk to those affiliates. They all completed actually 2 surveys over the course of 2 years and had intensive interviews and to try to distill what are some key strategies that are really helping you to serve more people with home ownership opportunities to grow your capacity. And so we're about to launch the Oregon Capacity Building Toolkit for Habitat for Humanity affiliates, and really looking at how we strategize to up our construction volume, the leadership and management that it takes on the back end, really the care and diversifying our staff teams, the changing role of volunteers in how we finance and utilize government programs. So that's something we're excited to do. We also do high touch, high touch support when there's a leadership transition at an affiliate. We find to be a really key moment. Also, I'm working intensely with our last volunteer run affiliate in the state over in LeGrand. They've owned property for quite some time, and we are working on a modular home building pilot. So excited, trying to get that all ready to apply for LIFT in January. Got to meet with the city manager who did not know there was such a thing as any LIFT program in the state of Oregon, right? And like, really, you can get state money to LeGrand? And these will be home. Wait, people can own these homes? Wait, like my kids could afford something like this one day and they can't afford anything now, is how that conversation went, which was really inspiring. And we're seeing this modular construction to be really a thing in our future. I'm going to boldly state for Habitat for Humanity, especially as volunteer dynamics continue to change. And looking at some of our coastal partners where there's some supply chain issues, we just think it's a really cool future opportunity.
So Dev Northwest works in Lane County, among others, and Lane County was where the Holiday Farm fire was in 2020, the year of fires. And the Blue River community burned to the ground. Every single home and structure was lost. And a group formed out of that, the Mackenzie Community Land Trust, to help try to acquire property in the wake of the fire, competing against a lot of speculative developers. Mackenzie Valley also a recreation spot. So the concern was that a lot of local folks wouldn't be able to afford to rebuild, and that land would be lost to vacation homes. So the land trust formed pretty immediately after the fire, and had very strong ambitions and goals and vision, and also recognized that they didn't know how to do it. And so they approached Dev Northwest at that point. We were also doing some of the fire recovery counseling, and asked if we would partner. And we said, absolutely. Because we had expertise, especially in LIFT and in community land trust, but we also recognized that we didn't have the grassroots roots in that community, right? We serve a 7-county area. There's no way that we could know the Blue River community as well as that group did. So it felt like a really natural fit. We ended up creating a developer agreement with them. So we are the developer on the project, and helped do the LIFT application to the state and some other funding applications. And then we actually also had a separate contract to be their fiscal sponsor, because they didn't yet have their 501c3 status at that point. But we wanted to make sure that those relationships were clean and distinct from each other. So it took some work and some thought, and some time and capacity, but we got to a really good place. And it's been a very positive partnership. We will likely help them with maybe one additional development as kind of additional practice, and then they intend eventually to be able to do their own development, which will be awesome. And fingers crossed, we should be closing on that financing here in the next couple of weeks. I will say that one of the challenges is it's 4 years from that fire, and as hard as it is to wait when we're developing from scratch somewhere and beating our heads against the wall because it's taking 3 years to get that development to fruition, when you're working with fire recovery survivors, it is 100 times more painful to experience all of those timeline challenges. And there have been many on this one.
Great. Let's see. So I think when the state put out LIFT funding and said, you know, you have to use a shared equity model and owning the land, we got a lot of calls from people across the state that were like, you know, we've been doing this for 20 years already, trying to learn about it. How do you set that up? How do you do it? How could this even work? So on technical assistance side, you know, we work directly with Habitat Oregon and with affiliates across the state, really to help set up, you know, give them the tools they needed to kind of help their affiliates implement this. But I think we still, to this day, get several calls from folks just about how do you do the CLT thing? Like, we want to use LIFT. So that's really where we've come in to help support. And again, we're trying to balance capacity with providing that support to other organizations across the state. But it's also, of course, we're just excited to see that kind of model of homeownership grow and know that these seeds that are being planted by LIFT are going to, you know, benefit generations to come. I think that's all.
I don't have much to add, just to say that the work that's happened in Wallowa County wouldn't have happened without technical assistance or expertise. And there's a dearth of it in Eastern Oregon, and we need more of it. And I think we need to figure out a way how to bring more technical assistance and expertise to rural areas in Oregon. And I just wanted to mention in closing, one of the question is, how do we get to, one question that a lot of people have is, how do we get to here, where we are today with this crisis in housing, which it is, a historical generational crisis. I would encourage people, I think it was yesterday, was a New York Times, The Daily podcast had a great segment on how we got here. And I'd recommend it for any of the practitioners in the room.
Great. So I'll open up to questions for any specific person, for everybody, for each other.
I think this question's for Emily, because I think you're the only representative that does both homeownership and affordable. Quite familiar with LIFT as a rental source and getting familiar with the ORCA process. ORCA process allows for essentially one sponsor to have two projects in any one phase of ORCA. The fact that the LIFT homeownership fund seems to be in a NOFA format outside of the ORCA, can you have two projects in ORCA and then do homeownership, or is that, do you have to navigate both of those pipelines at once?
Yeah, I can answer that because our two divisions operate, I mean, we're interlinked, but you can have different projects going on in different systems. So ORCA is separate than homeownership development. Yeah.
Not a question, but more of a comment. I just wanted to say thanks to the work groups for all your work. I think some of this news is fresh off the press, and so it's good to hear that there are some improvements coming to the processes.
That might prompt us to
really been, I think, also listening. Thank you. I'm not the loudest person. That's helpful. So thank you to Oregon Housing and Community Services for leaning in on this process, as well as all stakeholders. And the DOJ team really has shown up and listened. And then they started talking to us at meetings, which was great. And they have worked hours and hours between meetings. We've all had homework, right? And worked together. And it's been I know this phrase is used a lot, but it definitely has been an iterative process to get where we are today. And so just, I really appreciate the Homeownership Division for leaning in on this important work.
I would echo that. And I think we still have some things to work out. One of the quirks of LIFT as it applies to homeownership, LIFT is quirky, period. Everybody who's used it knows that. LIFT as it applies to homeownership causes DOJ and therefore I think OHCS some angst because the homes are sold to individual buyers. And so DOJ has this impression that they don't have the appropriate controls that Article Q requires. And I think it's been a mutual education process to try to help DOJ especially, and to a certain extent OHCS, understand that with the community land trust models and with the ground leases and with the operating agreements, the control actually isn't all that much different. So the ability of the future buyers to own those homes is very much subject to compliance with the LIFT affordability requirements and owner occupancy requirements and all of that. And there are provisions for us as the land trust managers to foreclose, for OHCS to foreclose, for lots of bad things to happen if that compliance doesn't happen. And so it's wonky that way. And we're still figuring out, I think, collectively how to make that work. We're still figuring out how to get future mortgage lenders to understand that and make it work. We're still figuring out how to get DOJ to understand that and make it work, how our construction lenders can understand that and make it work. And so it's technically complex. I guess that's the moral of the story that I would encourage everybody to take away. If you want to get into this work, 2025 is going to be a better year to enter this space than 2019 was, because we've done a lot of work. But I still think it's very technical, and you got to be committed to that and committed to be in the weeds for a while.
Yeah, and it's been a real privilege just to sit on the committee. I feel like I'm there sometimes not fully understanding about 25% of what's being discussed, but I appreciate having others that have been in those pieces of it. And I think one of the things, I do think there's still work to do, but I have really appreciated OHCS's willingness to have those conversations. And I think there's still work that we will all have to do to kind of manage through the challenges that have happened up to this point, as far as construction lenders still being a little like, well, is that LIFT funded? I think we're gonna have to do some re-education of both the construction financing side as well as the mortgage lending side to be like, oh, no, it's really okay now, because it's been a little bit of stop and starts along the way. So I think that all of us together, it might be a year or two to get out of that piece of it.
And the release of that appraised value cap is huge. Like, that is ground changing for LIFT. So if this work group accomplishes nothing else, that is a thing to be proud of.
And I do want to mention the following as well. So I've mentioned Sarah Batia from our Habitat Oregon team works with affiliates who, I'm just going to say these words out loud, would not have the capacity to apply for LIFT on time without help, right? Who have less internal staffing capacity, usually based in rural communities. And we have some other consultants who are helping in that kind of way too. And there's still a gap there, potentially, right, between capacity to build homes and willingness to use LIFT and ability to access it. So I also see OHCS has leaned in hard with the rolling NOFA process and the ability to provide technical assistance along the way, which is huge and wonderful, and like a vision for the future, right? Maybe we could have something that parallels what's happened with permanent supportive housing, where there's sort of a academy or work group where there might be some more seasoned practitioners and some newer practitioners, and we could work together to lift each other up, right? Maybe something like that could be in our future.
I was just wondering, just big picture, like housing prices keep going up, and government has to come in and help us do this work, right, in affordable housing. Are there any statistics that show, or like numbers that people are doing that are showing that the market won't just keep escalating so high that we can't do affordable housing, you know, at even the rates that we're doing it at, you know? Like, is there any end to this escalation, I guess?
Who wants to take that one?
No. I mean, no, honestly, I'll refer back to that podcast I referred to. We're probably a decade away from the supply being sufficient to slow the, moderate the price of housing so that incomes can catch up to a point where the ratio of income to housing, which should be about 3 to 1, isn't 6 to 1, which is about what it is in many areas of the country. And when I bought my first home, I think it was 2 to 1 in 1987 or something like that. So, and the last, even though we've had high mortgage rates and other factors that you would think might reduce the price of housing or level it out, we're still seeing 6% increases in jurisdictions across this country and throughout most of Oregon.
I don't, I would love to have a Pollyanna answer to that question, and I really don't. I think that our context is challenging, and so I would like to say that we sort of have to be like homeownership development, affordable homeownership development, like super ninjas, right? Really, like it's not going to suddenly get easier. We have to have better moves and like special dojos and go forth and like do more, because our context is challenging and has only gotten harder, right? And in my career with Habitat for Humanity, it's gotten more complex. Our compliance, you know, it's gone from here to here. We're building highly efficient, amazing homes that are technically complex. We're using layered government funding sources that are technically complex, right? That is our universe. And I think it's going to continue to be our universe. And so, you know, we could just kind of be like, oh, it's just too hard now. You know, I'm gonna paddleboard, or we could continue. We could continue to answer this call because our hearts are here and we see all the importance of home ownership and the real difference it makes in people's lives. And I will tell you that in Oregon, we are already beating national averages where home ownership production, even at all income levels, has been doing this. And like our little Habitat network, we're here. You know, we're just going up a little, but we could go up a lot with this change to LIFT for home ownership, right? So I think that we have to lean into all the things. We have to lean into all the things and make them as good as they possibly can be. And shameless plug coming into the 2025 legislative session. Some folks are in this room who've already signed on to the Unlocking Home Ownership Coalition. We are going to be advocating together for $50 million in the Homeownership Development Incubator Program, currently in the agency request budget. We are going to be advocating together for $45 million in down payment assistance for culturally responsive organizations, which can be layered in and help with this layering that we know we need, right? We're going to be making sure we get this lift. We've worked so hard to improve this program. We need those GO bonds now, right? We got to go actually get the money, and with some really important, critical barrier removal too, and some goal setting at the state level to keep our eye on the prize for home ownership and stay focused, right? So you're invited. You're invited. It's called the Unlocking Home Ownership Coalition. We have a website. It's homesfororegon.org. Shameless plug. Thank you.
Speaking to the, I don't think it's going to necessarily end. But I do, you know, when I started back 20 years ago, we were putting $30,000 into a home to make it permanently affordable. And that was about 25% of the value of the home at that time. So it actually was significant. And now we're leaving anywhere from, you know, 150 to 250 or more. But I will use this great opportunity to say permanent affordability works. So like this whole, I mean, that house that we put $35,000 into in 2000 has resold twice. And we have not had to put any more subsidy in. So I think that is a real, we're not going to be able to, up the budgets and get more and more money. I think how we're going to do it is really, really actually leaning into this creation of an alternative, form of home ownership, which is this model of shared equity. So I do think it's important, in the investment that Oregon is making will pay off.
I'm going to build on that because it was where I wanted to head to. I think the reason that Dev Northwest leaned in hard to the community land trust model is exactly because of that, because this takes homes essentially off the speculative real estate market and it makes them permanently affordable and limits that crazy appreciation. Now, we need to do it with a whole lot greater percentage of the housing market. And so that's one of my goals for Oregon over time. The community land trust model isn't universally beloved. There are folks who feel some kind of way about it because of that shared appreciation model, especially, and I want to call out communities that had their homes taken from them by eminent domain by cities in Oregon. And now we're saying, you can re-enter the homeownership market, but it's in the shared appreciation model, and that sucks. But the other thing that sucks is that the wealth building value of single family housing in our country, because of capitalism, benefits one or two generations at the expense of everybody else down the road. And something about that has to give. And so this is the idea that there can be shared benefit between the individual buyer who gets some of that appreciated value, who also gets all of the value of the principal they pay down on their mortgage, and the community gets an affordable house, and the next generation of buyers gets an affordable house to buy. So there's mutual benefit that way. On the tune of shameless self-plugs, NOAA, Bill, is starting a pilot of a mortgage product that will be designed specifically for CLT buyers, that will be a subsidized mortgage rate so that buyers of shared appreciation housing can get a 20-year mortgage for the same monthly payment that they could get a market rate 30-year mortgage, which is going to allow them to fast track the equity that they build through the pay down of principal and moderate some of what they're giving up through that shared appreciation model. So I think that when we get that tool up and running, plus we have the LIFT Homeownership Development money, we'll have a really sweet spot of the shared appreciation housing, but almost the same equity building and wealth building potential as a typical fee simple house. So I think that's another really key part of the puzzle that we're trying to get off the ground, and hopefully we'll be going back to the legislature for more funding.
One or two more questions. I'll run over to you.
Is there a technical definition of areas of high opportunity that was part of the working group outcome? Well, it was one of the list of things that were changes to the LIFT.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's a technical definition. I think it was used as a term to connote like density in places where there's a lot of amenities. So where homeowners have access to parks and schools and aren't contributing to urban sprawl.
See if there's a technical definition or a general definition.
Yeah, yeah.
You can look it up on Right, I just wasn't sure if they were using an existing definition or if it was just a generalized definition.
Any last questions? Nope.
Have you had any lenders take the OHTC on homeownership? And if so, who are they?
Great question. That program has not yet launched, and it will be specifically for limited equity co-ops. So one limited equity co-op builder in the state that we've had conversations with and helped pass the legislation is Square One. But we've also done a survey of other homeownership developers and have seen interest in that model in general. So that's where we're starting with OHTC because that's what's allowed in the statute right now. for homeownership, as well as manufactured homes. And trying to see if our do you have something to say about OHTC as well? Okay. Yeah, so it works on manufactured homes as not as a reduction in rent for the lot renter or manufactured homeowner, but just as a pass-through for a nonprofit organization. So those are kind of the two different models. But for LECs, limited equity co-ops, it hasn't yet launched, and it will be part of our next NOFA, where you can pair LIFT funds with OHTC for that model. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah. Who's that?
Yeah, okay.
Who gets there?
Bye.
This is more of a comment than a question in kind of answer to the question about affordability and rising price of homes. The other thing that's contributing to the loss of affordable housing and the rise in the price of housing is climate change and all the disasters we're having that disproportionately impact affordable housing. Paradise, California is a perfect example of this, where Paradise was the affordable housing hub for Butte County, California, got totally wiped out by a wildfire, and the only people that could afford post-COVID to build back were people that had means and resources and could afford the additional cost of the higher insurance. Most of the affordable housing is not back, and there are some builders and people that are building multifamily and trying to do some affordable builders trying to do affordable home ownership, but they've got a third of the population they had before, and most of it is not affordable. So that is contributing. And if we don't do something about climate change, and if we don't build smarter and safer as we're going, and it doesn't have to be that expensive to build safer, then we're just adding to that situation.
Thanks for that comment. And as I walk back, I'll just comment that the Blue River project is a great example of a rebuild. And the project that Katie mentioned in Bedford is meant to be resilient for wildfire survivors. And we have a lot of great projects in Central Oregon. I see some of our Central Oregon folks out here that are building to be fire resistant. So we're seeing some great innovations and opportunities and work being done around here. I wonder if our panelists want to comment on that, or just any last final thoughts to share before we take off. Big ideas that anybody wants to share, words of inspiration.
I don't know about big ideas necessarily, but just back to sort of first ideas is that the homeowners that all of our organizations are serving through these resources are wildly successful, right? Are wildly successful. Speaking specifically for our Habitat networks statewide, we have a 98% mortgage payoff rate. 98%, right? That's kind of amazing if you think about it, and especially if you think that our average home buyer earns 46% AMI at time of purchase, right? So I want to emphasize that, because like, why do all this work after all? These programs are hard, they're complicated, why still do it? Well, that household that we served just about every time had been paying more than half of their income on their rent. And then we're going to set that sales price so that their monthly mortgage payment falls within 30% of income. So you start saving money your first day you're in the house, as well as building equity, even if it is a shared equity model, right? So we've gotten to know over the years, we had the good fortune to meet these families and individuals who benefit from that kind of financial stability, not having to move or leave the community or cross the community chasing affordable rents, right? We all know that the kids who grow up in these homes are going to have much better educational success rates, right? So we saw our kids growing up in Proud Ground and Habitat homes. I don't know if Dev Northwest has done this study, graduating from high school, 16% higher rates than Oregonians of all incomes, right? That's incredible. Far more likely to become homeowners themselves, having better health outcomes for all members of the household. We see households who get to ever retire. Like, because you were paying so much for rent every month, like it wasn't even a thing that you had to think about it. But that's quality of life, right?
I guess the last thought I would have is an encouragement for anybody in the room who wants to get into homeownership development or wants to support homeownership to dip your toe in the advocacy waters. You know, housing is having a historic moment in terms of the crisis, but also in terms of how much people care about it and the universal understanding that we need for things to change. And some of those are, you know, united fronts with the rental side of our industry, and some of them are unique needs that are specific to homeownership. Some of them are funding, but even more, well, probably at least as many of them are policy. How do we make subdivisions easier? We got the missing middle housing wins. That was awesome. But how do we make subdivisions easier? How do we make it easier to get through local permitting processes? Condos, how do we enable, that's a whole ball of wax. But anyway, I think sometimes nonprofits are hesitant to step into advocacy. And I would just say, don't be, please. We need everybody at the table. And I feel like there are like 5 of us that are the voices that show up over and over again on homeownership. And we just need more people at the table. And we need more people in Salem so that we've got more districts represented and more communities represented who are all united in what we're asking for. There's no one thing that's going to solve it, right? We always say affordable housing is expensive because of a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Well, we need to start taking those paper cuts one at a time out of the equation. And it's going to take a long time and it's going to take a lot of work, but there's no choice because there's no one thing that's going to fix it. So we got to start knocking off the small stuff. And I think right now we've got, a governor and a legislature that are really supportive of housing. Sometimes it's easier to pass things at the state level than it is at the local jurisdiction level. And we got to lean into that.
And I was going to build off Shannon a little bit. One of the things I wanted to mention before was, when you talk about shared equity homeownership, we've managed 131 resales of our homes over the last 25 years. About 60 to 65% of those families are moving into market rate homeownership when they sell their community land trust home. And that actually tracks the national average as well for community land trust homes. So for many people, like Shannon was talking about, they're paying off their mortgages, they're staying put. Awesome, right? But when they resell, many of them are going on to the market rate homeownership as well.
Following on Shannon's comment about retirement, but there is there's a cohort of housing professionals who are retired or retiring over the next 10 years and 5 years, even less. It's being in the affordable housing industry is sort of like being in the mafia. I mean, I can say that I'm Italian American, but once you're in, right? And even these retirees, I think, they miss it. And we need to figure a way to involve them, as consultants, maybe embed them with organizations, finding maybe even a way for the state to help pay for that. It's a really deep resource in this state that will be lost as people retire, but that could be used to help on the technical expertise side.
And I just wanted to say separately, when I started working in housing and homeownership back in 2015, so I'm still pretty new to the game, I was at a Habitat affiliate, and homeownership was not secondary, not tertiary, but like so far behind every other type of housing opportunity, affordable housing opportunity. And in such a short time, I have seen it grow as something that people are interested in. And just sitting here, seeing this whole room filled with people interested in homeownership opportunities in Oregon is just a privilege and absolutely mind-blowing to me. So I really appreciate everyone being here and all of your interest.
Yeah. Thank you so much to our panelists and bringing your expertise. We're clearly all so passionate about homeownership development. So if you're homeownership development curious, come talk to any of us. We want to convert you. But thank you so much for attending, and thank you again.